Transpiration examined. So when you have your stomata and you have lots of water, normally what happens, temporal means time, the stomata will open during the day and close at night. But at night there's no photosynthesis, so there's no demand for CO2. The stomata close to prevent water loss. Now, the guard cell is located around the stomata, and when it opens, you have potassium ions enter the guard cell, and when it flows into the guard cell, this causes it to swell, and when it swells, the stomata opens. So during this sunny day, there's a demand for CO2, the stomata will be open, and there's lots of water, and the plant will trade water loss for the gas exchange. So what controls the stomata is the guard cell located around it. It will close and it only opens when there's lots of water around the guard cell, and the stomata will open, allowing gas exchange. You have your roots over here. This absorbs all the water minerals, and this transpiration, loss of water from the leaves, mostly to stomata, creates a force. So think of the giant tree as a giant straw. Gas is lost to the top of the leaves and draws the water up through the roots. That's a very simple way of thinking about it. Let's go into more detail. You have the tree. I like this animation. Water enters through the root and is pushed up to the stem and out through the leaves. As the leaves release the water through evaporation, transpiration, it forces the rest of the water to come up through hydrogen bonding. Hydrogen bonding is the attractive force between H molecules and the water molecules. So transpiration is like, always think of the plant as being like a giant straw. And that's what's going to help you get through this part of transpiration. Now you get the water to the xylem of the root. It's a very complicated pathway of the root. And you have apoplast, composed of non-living parts of a plant. And you have symplast, which is composed of living parts of a plant. When you have apoplast, the water movement occurs by passive diffusion, because the apoplastic part of the plant has no need for any fluids. It's kind of like dry wood. It's dead dry wood that has no fluid inside. So the water moves right through it through passive diffusion. But when you have symplastic movement, where you're moving through the living parts of the plant, the living parts of the plant has its own cellular fluid, it has its own cytoplasm, and this will create some sort of diffusion because you have something there. So apoplast, you have non-living parts where it just diffuses right through because there's nothing inside of it. Symplast is the living parts of the cell, and it has cytoplasm and blood, etc. And this moves through osmosis. The difference between diffusion and osmosis is simply osmosis is only for water. You generate transpirational pull through these aquaporins, and basically all that means, aqua means water and porins means holes. So this allows only water to move through the plant, and there's no lipids involved, there's no fat, so it's much quicker than normal. Because when you have diffusion, you have to diffuse through a fat and the cellular membrane, it slows everything down. But having a simple channel, an aquaporin, aqua means water, porin means hole, the water can move through very quickly. Now the movement of minerals into the root, you have extracellular fluid, transport proteins, and cytoplasm. Extracellular fluid is just fluid between the cells of the plant that aren't involved in the cells of the plant. So think of your body, you have lungs and heart, and between your lungs and heart, there's other fluids that aren't part of the bloodstream. So that's what extracellular fluid means. Transport proteins are things that move other things. So these K plus are little potassium ions. They move through these little channels. And membrane potential refers to the difference between the charges. So whenever you hear the word potential, you're talking about charges. Anyway, a cation is a positive ion, like a K plus. An anion is a negative ion. So what you gotta do is you have all these minerals being made into other things like amino acids and proteins and lipids, and they need to move through the cell, but the cell will not allow a charged molecule to move without taking out another charged molecule. So you have a positive ion and you have a negative ion. For every positive ion that goes in, a negative ion comes out. This maintains the charge. If you have too many positive ions coming in, you develop a positive charge. It creates an imbalance in the cell. Cells don't like this. It affects the pH. It affects the way the cell operates. So you always have to have a balance. That's why you have a membrane potential cation uptake. That's the movement of positive ions. Anion uptake. That's the movement of negative ions. You can only bring in a negative ion with a positive ion. That's how it works. You co-transport neutral solutes with H pluses also. So this is the way you get minerals moving through the root. Very simplistic. Much harder than I wanted it to be, but I thought you might enjoy seeing this. A cation is a positive ion, an ion is a negative ion. Co-transport means moving together. You can play this part of the video back again because it's quite confusing. You have macro and micronutrients. Macro is big, like the mall, macro. Micro is small. In order to survive, you have macronutrients which are required to plants in large amounts. And these are carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, hydrogen, K is potassium, C is calcium, Mg is magnesium, Si is silicon. These are things that you really require for your plants. If you don't have it, they'll die. Micronutrients are a little smaller and they function as cofactors. They help do other things. A cofactor means like I don't really need it, but I need it to eat something else. Mycorrhizae is a mutualistic relationship, and I think Crew Michael talked about this. Fungus and roots live together, it's a symbiosis, two organisms helping each other. That's mutualistic. The fungus normally helps with nitrogen fixation and the nitrogen cycle that we talked about previously. But in further detail, it's a fungus specifically tied to the roots of the plant that allow the plant to break down nitrogen. Sometimes you have parasitic symbioses, but these are normally bad, where one organism benefits off the other, like a leech sucking your blood, or a mosquito biting you and sucking your blood. Not a good thing. But mycorrhizae is a mutualistic relationship between the organism, fungus, and then the plant, roots. Don't forget, fungus is singular, Fungus, but fungi is plural, Fungi. Now you have gas exchange occurring throughout the stomata. CO2 is required for photosynthesis, and O2 is released after photosynthesis. And the root exchange occurs with spaces taking in O2 and releasing CO2. So all through the plant, you have CO2 going in and O2 coming out. Sugars are produced by photosynthesis in the plant. You got your carbon dioxide mixing with water, forming a sugar and releasing oxygen. The phloem sap, the green arrows can flow both ways. The xylem sap, the blue arrows, will transport water and minerals upward from the root to shoots. Shoots are like the leaves. Now water's in the root. So now what? Root pressure is caused by the active distribution of mineral nutrients into the root xylem. If you don't have transpiration to carry the ions up, you have too much root xylem and it causes a problem. So at night, what happens is plants will release their root sap, and it's called guttation or exudation. Really fancy word to say releasing sap. Okay, there'll be xylem sap forming on the edge of the leaf like this, and it looks like it's the sap of the leaf. Don't get confused with dew. Dew is when you have condensation of water at night from gas to liquid that forms on the leaves. That's just water. Guttation or exudation refers to the xylem sap. So it's the sap of the leaf being released to release the pressure formed by having too much minerals and sap inside the plant. This allows the water to flow from the root all the way to the leaves. So once the water is in the root, from the soil to the root, through osmosis, if you know water is osmosis, the root pressure forces it to become rigid and provides a force that moves the root all the way to the top. But that's not the only way it moves. What really causes the movement is called TACT. And it's simply the properties of water we talked about previously. It's cohesion, adhesion, it's tension. We talked about water tension in the water. When two molecules approach each other, they form an intermolecular attraction called a hydrogen bond. You have a bond between hydrogen and oxygen. That's a real bond right here. This is the bond. The hydrogen bond is like the magnetic attraction between water molecules. This is what causes surface tension. It also allows the plant to draw water. So that's one factor, tension. The second factor is adhesion, where the water sticks to the sides of the cell. So adhesion refers to when the water bonds to xylem cell walls, where it sticks to sides of the cell. Cohesion is when water sticks to each other. So adhesion is when water sticks to something else. Cohesion is when water sticks to each other. It allows you to draw things up through a straw. Transpiration is water constantly being lost by transpiration in the leaf. And so when one water molecule is pulled out of the leaf, it pulls another one up. This transpirational pull using capillary action. Capillary action is just the force of being within a small space. Capillaries refer to small little tubes in your body or small little tubes in the plant. And inherent means like a property. So the surface tension of the water pulls up the plant. So like I talked to you before, it's a giant straw. The water goes in the roots, pulls up to the xylem, and releases through the leaves. So the key is the hydrogen bond. This allows adhesion, cohesion, and all the properties we talked about before. Just remember, it's the attraction between hydrogen to oxygen here, but not the actual bond. So you have the actual bond, then you have this magnetic attraction between the hydrogen and oxygen of each individual water molecule. Yes, I know it's very complicated, but as you work through it, it starts to make sense as time goes by. Don't worry about that. So here's a summary of the vocabulary. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to ask, and review any parts of this video that you felt were confusing.